Assalamu alaikum and welcome back once again to Today in African History with Baba Shaka. I'm Baba Shaka and today is February 20th, 2021. And it was on this date, back in the year 1923, that Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was born in the Kitty section of Georgetown, Guyana in South America. And I was thinking late into last night just how I was going to approach the subject of this giant of a man who served as the leader of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana from 1964 until his death in 1985. His accomplishments are much too far ranging for one to include in this short presentation. I did, however, come across a review of a book written by David A. Granger, a scholar, astute researcher, and who also served as president of Guyana from 2015 to 2020. The book is entitled Forbes Burnham and the Liberation of Southern Africa. I will share the review with you because it will give you an idea of just who Forbes Burnham was, and hopefully you will endeavor to take a closer look at this man and his legacy. David Granger's Forbes Burnham and the Liberation of Southern Africa examine one of the more enlightened foreign policies initiative of Forbes Burnham's administration between 1970 and 1985. This book provides unassailable evidence of Guyana's support for the liberation wars in Southern Africa. Support for the liberation wars and the condemnation of apartheid and white minority rule in South Africa were among the guiding principles of Forbes Burnham's foreign policy, from which he never deviated. Other principles were support for the non-aligned movement, Caribbean regional integration, African Caribbean Pacific collaboration, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the primacy of international law in relations between states. Granger points out that Burnham's Southern African policy was part of his wider opposition to colonialism, imperialism, and racism, and predated the radicalization of Guyana's foreign policy. Granger recalls Burnham's condemnation of the barbarous killings perpetrated by the colonial powers in Nyasaland, which is now Malawi, in 1959, and his denunciation of the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa in 1960. Granger did not set out to disabuse assertions of the link between Burnham's international policies or international relations and the radicalization of national politics. He does provide, however, indisputable evidence of Burnham's opposition to the white minority rule in the South African government when Burnham said, and I quote, "The whole South African government's policy is to be deprecated, and the shootings at Sharpeville and Pondoland were just the culmination of the most disgusting policy. Not only are the native Africans, the original inhabitants of the country, robbed of their political rights, but they are also destitute of human rights. They are not allowed to organize trade unions in the same way as whites are. It is an offense for them to strike, and the trade union leaders from time to time are prosecuted." This, unquote, this book, Forbes Burnham and the Liberation of Southern Africa, provides proof of the various forms of support which Guyana provided to the liberation movements in Southern Africa. These include diplomatic, financial, political, and sporting sanctions. Burnham's support was remarkable considering Guyana's economic difficulties at the time and the likely pressure such support was likely to evoke within the imperialist camp. United States Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, on Christmas Eve Day in 1975, asked his ambassador to Guyana to request Burnham to deny the use of his country's refueling facilities for planes transporting Cuban troops and supplies to support the Movimento Popular de Liberato de Angola, or the MPLA, in Angola. Another directive was issued 1 week later, urging the U.S. ambassador to Guyana to do all that was possible to urge the government of Guyana to deny permission for the use of the Tomiri International Airport for refueling the planes transporting Cuban troops to Angola. Burnham never acceded to the U.S. demands. The Forbes Burnham administration understood the risk involved in pursuing such a courageous policy, and especially through the specific measures and political postures which were adopted. These measures included granting Guyanese passports to African freedom fighters, imposing a ban on persons with sporting ties to South Africa, allowing refueling stops and advocating African liberation within the non-aligned movement and the United Nations. Guyana's support for the African liberation struggles were consistent and has been so acknowledged. Addressing a ceremony to mark Guyana's 51st independence anniversary in May 2017, the Public Works Minister Nathi Nleko said, and I quote, Guyana ardently and unapologetically became an activist state against the continuation of imperialism, colonialism, and racism in Africa, and stood firm for the liberation of the oppressed peoples all over the world. Unquote. The book, Forbes, Burnham, and the Liberation of Southern Africa, is constructed logically in three sections. The introduction established the historical record of support for African liberation. The second section, titled The Struggle Against Colonialism, examines Burnham's policy of support for ending colonial rule in Africa. And the third section, entitled The Struggle for the Liberation of South Africa, addresses Guyana's anti-apartheid policy, including the actions it took in pursuit of this policy. The book demonstrates how a small state can punch above its weight in international relations. Guyana stood out as a beacon of support for African liberation. Forbes Burnham was an undefeatable champion for that cause. David Granger published this book 2 years before he assumed presidency of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. As president, he made it his duty to ensure that Forbes Burnham's and Guyana's contribution to the liberation struggles in Southern Africa were never forgotten. In his address at the accreditation of the High Commissioner of the Republic of South Africa to the Cooperative Republic of Guyana in November 2016, the Guyanese president recounted the practical steps which Guyana took in helping to dismantle apartheid, liberate Southern Africa, and ensure majority rule in the Republic of South Africa. He recalled that, quote, Guyana employed every available international forum, including the Caribbean Community, the Commonwealth, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the United Nations, to agitate for an end to apartheid in South Africa. Guyana sponsored and co-sponsored resolutions at the United Nations which condemned the racist system and which called attention to acts of brutality committed against opponents of the system. We welcomed Oliver Reginald Tambo to Georgetown in July of 1987. We celebrated Nelson Mandela's release from prison. We exulted in the introduction of majority rule in the Republic of South Africa. These events and achievements vindicated the solidarity between our peoples. Unquote. Scholars and students will find this book an invaluable source of information of a key pillar of Guyana's foreign policy. David Granger is a scrupulous researcher, as I mentioned before. He has acknowledged earlier research by Vincent Alexander, Ronald Austin, Rashley Jackson, and others, and tapped into sources including policy speeches, newspapers, and unpublished manuscripts, government publications, newspaper columns, and books. The book's greatest value is to be found, however, in its contribution to the understanding of the craft of policy making. It reveals how Guyana constructed a policy predicated on ideology and principle, and examines the manner in which it gave effect to that policy, including the forging of strong personal relations. This book, Forbes Burnham and the Liberation of Southern Africa, is a permanent testimonial to Burnham's admirable and bold policies towards Southern Africa. It is a policy which cannot ever be disabused or diminished. It was on this date, February 20th, back in 1923, that Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham was born. Once again, I would like to give a special shout out to President Baba Mosi, who himself is a Guyanese, and the sisters and brothers of the Woodson Banneker Jackson Bay Division of number 330 UNIA Rehabilitating Committee. That's the Universal Negro Improvement Association, originally founded by the late great Marcus Messiah Garvey, and the African Communities Leagues, who are helping to promote these daily lessons on their Facebook pages, because we all have the same goals, and that is simply to enlighten African people to their glorious path. For those of you who have already subscribed, as I say every day, we cannot thank you enough. For those of you who have not yet joined the family and become a subscriber, we urge you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Ring that little bell that will notify you whenever we upload one of these videos. Send us a comment, like, and share, especially with the young amongst you, because as I mentioned before, they don't teach this stuff in school. So until tomorrow, inshallah, this is Baba Shaka with Today in African History. Masalam.